having a very serious mismatch as far as legal education is concerned. 1980s, 90s, these people in law faculties, we had best of teachers. Those who were respected not only in India, but in countries outside India. But many of the students, those who came to legal education, as I said the other day also, many of us, I'm saying, not everybody, did not come to law as a matter of choice. They come by chance to study law. Succeeded, became judges, became everything in life. Now, suddenly, we find for the last 25 years, I'm not saying because only of the emergence of the law schools, but prestigious faculties like universities of Delhi, etc., the landscape of legal education changed. And the change was very significant. The change was that we saw that the best of students started coming to the legal education, like 5-year course or 3-year course, whatever it may be. And then the mismatch was that this is a time when we found that in many places, I'm not saying everywhere, the teachers, those who came to teaching, came by chance, not by choice. So this mismatch for me, that this was a time in 1980s and 90s where teachers came to teaching profession by choice, not by chance. But here we are at a time when many places teachers have come to teaching by not by choice but by chance, and the students come by choice. So when a university like NLU Delhi would select 80 students out of 16,000, you can expect the expectations are very high. And if those expectations are not met by a galaxy of teachers, those who are very senior and also those who are another class of teachers, those who are trained in a fashion or trained in institutions which have very high regard for research. We were a generation, we were not to do research in that very concept way, but now we have a generation of students who have been studied, those who have studied abroad, those who have come from various jurisdictions, but they are very good at research. So my idea was to always have a combination of very senior teachers, whether it was Hyderabad or it was here, and that's why it may be Professor M.P. Singh, it may be Professor Pandey. In fact, I would love to have, they're all senior to me, I have great regard for them. And it's not that I have regard, I only, sometimes I'm scared of them. Because I have given them that authority that they can come to my office, share with me whatever good or bad they want to share with me. If we do not do that, we do not grow as an institution. As an institution, we do not grow. So the strength of NLU Delhi was having teachers like Professor M.P. Singh, Professor Pandey, those senior professors, we have senior teachers, a very fine mix of very senior teachers and a young faculty committed to the cause of education. And I believe universities are open spaces where if democracy has to survive, this kind of dialogue is very important. Discussion is very important. Disagreement is very important. And dissent is also very important. And if in this country we understand that these things are very important for a democracy, I think the future of democracy is very, very bright. At the same time, the experiment in the Indian Constitution, is welcome. The experiment is in Indian Constitution is very, very significant because it is a very successful experiment. With all what we have discussed, we found many faults and failings. But at the same time, you see, if you look around and see countries like Bangladesh, you see Sri Lanka, or you see Pakistan, we are a great experiment, and this experiment is great success. So in that sense, we have moved, we have difficulties, we have problems, but we have traveled a lot. It is not that 68 years, or it's not a very short time, it's not a very long time. But at the same time, the development in the Indian constitutional history or Indian constitutional movement has been a very significant moment in this country. Thank you, Professor M.P. Singh, being with us and accepting to be the Chair Professor of Comparative Law, and please keep guiding us. For teacher, I always say there's no age to retire. I remember when I went to Visakhapatnam when the function for the retirement of Professor Lakshmanath being organized, I said, no, he's not retiring, he's going with me to Hyderabad. And that's how Professor Lakshmanath next day was at Hyderabad, Nalsar Hyderabad, was a professor of law. You know his writings, he's a very good scholar. And not only that, he became a registrar, and then after he became a vice chancellor. And many of you will not know, he has already crossed 70 years. The present chief minister of the state of Bihar amended the act and said the vice chancellor would remain up to 75. Now, we really don't bother whether the country would recognize the service of teachers in other fields or not. We have our own judiciary, our own area where we can excel. I certainly agree with you. And let us excel in what is assigned to us as an academic, either we are in universities or in colleges. But at the same time, let us not think that after a particular time a teacher is retired. But then the teacher has to make a significant contribution and not to do politics. If a teacher would retire and come to the university and do politics, probably that will kill the institution. That would kill the institution. But if you come to make a significant contribution to the academic and research, then everybody will go. I always say, institutions are great things, and I conclude by saying, man may come, man may go, I go on forever. Ranveer Singh is today here, he will not be here after some time. All will leave these places, but the institutions will carry on. And the future of these institutions will lie with you. And that future would be how you performed, what were your ideals, and whether you are looking only for yourself, or you are selfish or self-centered, or you work for the institution. I think that's very, very important for everybody if the institutions of this kind in the country or education has to survive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I have the honor of proposing the vote of thanks today, and I promise to be as short and brief as possible. May I take this opportunity of thanking two individuals who have been at the heart of this program, Dr. Prabhash Ranjan, Dr. Surya Deva, who put the whole thing together, conceptualized it, identified the resource persons, and ensured they all got here today. Thank you so much for that. May I also thank Professor Dr. Ranveer Singh, Vice Chancellor for National Law University, Delhi, for extending his wholehearted support for this entire endeavor. Thank you so much, sir. A warm thanks goes out to all the presenters and participants for today. It was, I can assure you, very intellectually stimulating discussions, the presentations. We are hoping, as Prabhash mentioned, to bring out a book with all what was presented today, and many more who could not join us for today's program. A special mention I must make of Dinesh, who has worked tirelessly over the last 1 month, ensuring all arrangements are in place. A warm thanks also goes out to the administrative staff of this university. There are the people who work in the background, never start coming forward, but without their help, constant support and guidance, this would not have been possible. Thank you all of you. We end today's program partially here. We would next proceed to the dinner talk by Professor Rajkumar. The dinner talk is on the second floor of the administrative building. This is the floor just above the faculty lounge. May I request all the faculty members of the university who are familiar with the layout to guide our guests to the second floor administrative building.
In the next building?
Yes, sir. The administrative, during the administration, that's where the library is. It's on the second floor, right? And we will commence our proceedings there. Thank you so much.
Good evening to all of you. First of all, let me thank Dr. Ranveer Singh as well as the National Law University, Prabhash, Surya, and many friends and colleagues here for giving me this opportunity to deliver what is being called as a dinner talk. It's almost like the dinner is contingent upon the talk, talk getting over. So let me just try this dinner talk. I was thinking about what I should be speaking, and I did tell Prabhash that after long days of proceedings, I didn't want to talk anything about law in particular, even for that matter, the extraordinarily impressive scholarship of my teacher and mentor, Professor F. Singh. So what I've done in many ways, some sort of reflections about sharing some important years of my own life with the man whose life we are celebrating. So I've titled this set of reflections as The Man, the Mind and the Making of the Maha Mentor. I call him as a Maha Mentor because there are many mentors we have engaged in our lives, but Professor M. Singh is an extraordinarily unique person who has touched the lives of many of us, including me, and who has left with such an indelible impression that it has been a life-changing experience for us as students. There are several aspects of Professor M. Singh that are worth talking about, but I'll keep it short and will reflect about a few things. We can of course talk about his scholarship and his significant contributions to the world of knowledge, but I'm not going to do that. We all are aware of it. But before I talk about Professor M. Singh, I will briefly reflect about what a very renowned professor at MIT, Professor Alan Lippman, he talked about what does it mean to be a public intellectual. In fact, Alan was the first professor to ever receive a joint appointment in the sciences and humanities at MIT. And so he talked about the role of public intellectuals and their responsibilities. In Alan's work, he talked about the different levels of public intellectuals and the responsibilities that come with it. In his view, the level 1 public intellectual is somebody who speaks and writes for the public exclusively about one's own discipline. The level 2 public intellectual that Alan talks about is somebody who speaks and writes about one's own discipline and how it relates to the social and cultural and political perspectives around that discipline. And the level 3 public intellectual that Alan talks about is somebody who becomes a public intellectual by invitation only. And I quote Alan Lightman here, the intellectual has become elevated to a symbol, a person that stands for something far larger than the discipline from which he or she originated. A level 3 intellectual is asked to write and speak about a range of public issues not necessarily directly connected to their original field of expertise. One can move slowly, even unconsciously, upward through these various levels I've described. But I would argue that one should be conscious of the movement and especially the increasing degree of responsibilities. In particular, level 3 should be entered with caution and respect. Here, there is the greatest responsibility. The public intellectual is often speaking about things beyond his or her area of expertise. Such a person must be careful. He must be aware of the limitations of his knowledge. He must acknowledge his personal prejudices because he is being asked to speak for a whole realm of thought. He must be aware of the huge possible consequences of what he says and writes and does behave. He has become, in a sense, public property because he represents something large to the public. He has become an idea himself, a human striving. He has enormous power to influence and change, and he must wield that power with respect, unquote. I believe that Professor M.P. Singh combines what Professor Lippman will identify in a person, the qualities of the level 1, level 2, and level 3 public intellectual. This is the rare quality of an extraordinary human being that is personified in Professor Singh. Now let me just reflect upon a few of the amazing qualities that many of us have been privy to, and I can say that generations of students have been privy to. First, an inspiring teacher beyond the classroom. I mean, I came into Delhi way back in 1994, and the only thing that really inspired me most was some of the teachers. Two of them are present here, but Professor M.P. Singh was so special that so much I learned in my own life and everything that mattered to me at that point of time was shaped through the prism of his eyes. And I was significantly benefited and in many ways inspired by his very presence. One learns so much from a teacher, but then the most important thing one learns is not just what one teaches as a teacher, but how one's life is led. And that's what Professor LP Singh did by just living like what he has been. And that is one of the most inspiring experiences for me and for many others as a teacher. Second, humility and grace deeply embedded in his character. You know, one of the things that we have all been witness to is that many accomplished scholars are hugely arrogant. We have our own share of names in India. I don't think we need to even mention those names. But Professor M. Singh epitomizes this character of humility, a deeply felt human phenomenon that is rare among people who are accomplished. And so in that sense, he's not just not arrogant and never has a sense of self-importance, but he's completely self-effacing, and it comes to him so naturally. His humility is not only reflected in his scholarship, but his engagement with everybody he engages and interacts, and he has lived a life of humility and grace. Third, this is another extremely rare quality, I must say, and for all the young people in the room, this is something to be imbibed from. His patience, his tolerance, and his sense of forgiveness. Professor Singh belongs to this rare breed of human beings whose patience and tolerance knows no limits or has any boundaries. We have learned from his patience, and we've also been inspired by his forgiveness. I can give several instances for those of us who have been in Delhi University at a critical point of time when he was the Dean of the Faculty of Law of University of Delhi. There was so much that we would call as injustice that happened to him and to his leadership and to his family and all of that. But Professor Singh was just reflecting all of that with this highest sense of tolerance and forgiveness, that he never harbored even the slightest sense of animosity against anybody who, I would say, were responsible for acts that are simply unbecoming of academics, let alone, lawyers and people who are engaged with law. So that's a missing. There were also, in fact, I have to say that I was very fortunate, and also in some ways seeing that misfortune that was happening around Professor Singh in those turbulent years, the trials and tribulations he faced as the Dean of the Faculty of Law of University of Delhi, and later becoming the Director of the Indian Law Institute, and in some ways, in violation of all constitutional as well as legal norms, stepping down or asked to step down, or in many ways even not recognizing his appointment there. All of that, he took it with this extraordinary sense of stoic nature, as somebody who combines deep human values of looking at individual actions with a greater sense of forgiveness, and completely indifferent to that injustice that was happening right in front of his eyes. And in many ways, many of us felt that he was indeed victimized, but then he never had a sense of victimization embedded in him, and he was completely at peace with what was going on. And I remember very vividly that on that evening when we packed up his stuff at the office of the Director of Indian Law Institute and left the ILI building as the director, it was just like any other normal day in his life. It was almost like an impossible experience for me to handle as a young student, that somebody could deal with so much of injustice, with so much of patience, tolerance, and a complete sense of forgiveness. And this is just not, it's so deeply embedded in this character, it comes so naturally, and we've all been inspired by that. The fourth aspect of this man's, personality is an enduring sense of equanimity. Professor Singh has this extraordinary quality to maintain at all times a sense of equanimity that is the hallmark of a great human being. I have never ever seen him phenomenally excited about any honor or position or a privilege that is endowed upon him, nor have I ever witnessed him being weak or diffident during many hardships, trials and tribulations he has suffered in his good part of his life. This sense of equanimity reflects the extraordinary character of Professor M.P. Singh, and again, we are all deeply inspired by the life that he has led. The fifth aspect of Professor M.P. Singh is always stood up for truth and justice and acted with conscience. Professor Singh has stood for truth and justice regardless of how people and even the society will perceive his actions. It is always his own conscience that he speaks to and believes in, and somehow everything else around him is immaterial, including, I must say, and I dare say, his family members too. That is another great quality of this wonderful human being. In a world in which increasingly standing up for truth and justice will make you not only unpopular, but also might lead to adverse consequences, he is a beacon of light and hope that has taught us by his life why it is important to act only in accordance with one's own conscience. For those of us who have known his work, we know his own position with regard to reservations and affirmative action, and he took those scholarly positions at a time when it was not only unpopular to take those positions, but it was downright unaccepted. And I know that some of his family members debated and discussed and disagreed with him, but he stood by his own position, drawn out of a deeper sense of understanding of law and society. I know also that there was a point of time when he was extremely unpopular because some of us, me and another friend of mine, we petitioned the Delhi High Court against the practice of many academics and in violation of the then rules and regulations, both in the Advocates Act as well as the Delhi University. And those were very difficult times. But then Professor M.P. Singh, again, always speaking to his conscience, stood up to that, notwithstanding the fact there was what Professor Ranbir Singh talked about, a virulent form of politics deeply embedded in many faculty members at the Delhi University. But Professor M.P. Singh never harbored even the slightest of disaffection. In fact, I know that even when he spoke at different farewells of people who were responsible for many such acts against him, he has always maintained the highest sense of dignity and admiration for all those people who consciously for many, many years committed many acts against him. And that's just extraordinary, and it's rare in any human being. The sixth is something which we have not only seen but also experienced. Professor M.P. Singh has this phenomenally impressive qualities and a rare quality nowadays of honesty, integrity and rectitude. He combines those values that ought to be embedded in humankind for being an inspiring teacher. He lived and continues to live his life with honesty, integrity and rectitude. Even when he disagrees with people or is disappointed with their actions, there is so much of magnanimity and gracefulness that is truly extraordinary, a human quality that is worthy to be imbibed by all of us. The seventh part of his own character is he combines qualities of believing in tradition and accepting modernity without any form of dogmatism. Now this is something which I have noticed a lot in Professor M.P. Singh's, my own engagement and interaction with him. Even when the law faculty at that time was relatively conservative about ideas, about perspectives, about what students should be doing, what students should be wearing, for example. Professor M.P. Singh, although has this extraordinary ability to look at the future, but yet conscious of the sort of current realities, combine a great balance of tradition and modernity. And he pursued that tradition and modernity without any form of dogmatism, accepting there are different shades of views and perspectives that prevail. You know what, for a student, that's like living life and seeing how one should behave. In fact, I have learned this in much less inspiring ways. I've told this to my students as well, and that's what Professor M.P. Singh does, because he doesn't talk a lot about these things, but he lives his life. So, whenever I get back, I work in Sonipat, and I come back late in the evening, and whenever I come back home, I see my son watching TV. So I tell him, you know, you're all the time watching TV. You should be doing this. It's bad for your eyes. You're not studying and all of that. And I give this sort of 3-minute intense lecture. And he's obviously not very happy. And then I go back to my room, change my clothes, and switch on the TV. And I keep watching. Every day I do this. And so one day he just came to me on a weekend, and again I was trying to do this, and he said, you say this every day, but you just do the opposite. You go and watch TV. And I'm like, I just thought about it, and then I felt that children, like students, they're not going to listen to what you say. They're going to listen, or rather they will follow what they see, what they observe. So Professor M.P. Singh, by living the life of accepting both tradition and modernity, but also constantly seeking balance, has lived a life by rejecting dogmatism of any kind, and that's what many of us as students observed in him, and we could be inspired by that. The eighth quality that Professor M.P. Singh reflects is his generosity, magnanimity, and the absolute willingness to help everybody. You know, as you know, now since I was a student and now I'm a professor and also at a university, and we all are all the time very busy and feel that there's so little time to do things. But in Professor M.P. Singh's life, the most important person is not his wife, not his children, not anybody else, but the student. He will just do anything for a student. And I've seen that so many times. And these are students who might have just been studying there, graduated a few years ago, graduated a decade ago, probably completely lost in touch with him, and will return after 10 years, probably get a recognition.